Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Prabha Atreya, the designated federal officer for this session, who is going to conduct the open public hearing. And the next speaker, the first speaker for this session is Dr. Rajesh Gupta. Dr. Gupta, could you please start your presentation, please? You have 3 minutes to go.
My name is Rajesh Gupta. Currently, I do consulting for the pharmaceutical industry, including vaccine manufacturers. I have more than 40 years experience in development, manufacture, quality control, and regulation of vaccines, both in the industry and regulatory agencies, including CBER, FDA, where I was a deputy division director and lab chief. Today, I am going to present my views on some aspects about the need for a booster dose of COVID-19 vaccine based on my experience and understanding of science while working with other vaccines. Next slide, please. Major justifications for a booster dose have been waning circulating and neutralizing antibodies and incidence of COVID-19 infections in vaccinated individuals a few months after vaccination. Next slide. A few facts about circulating antibodies. First, for most diseases, protective levels of circulating antibodies are not known. When known, for example, tetanus and diphtheria, these are highly variable. Next slide. Secondly, circulating antibodies decline a few months after vaccination. But booster doses are not given for most vaccines except for toxin-mediated diseases. Protection against most diseases is not necessarily through maintaining high level of circulating antibodies. I'm at slide 5 now, actually. Next slide. Instead of protection by most vaccines is through rapid deployment of immune system by activation of immune memory by the invading pathogens, except for toxin-mediated diseases, where protective levels are required to be maintained, which is done through periodic boosters every 10 years. The reason is that tetanus and diphtheria toxins are highly potent. Minute doses of these toxins are lethal, but not enough to activate memory. Further, these toxins bind immediately to nerve cells and are not available to immune cells. Next slide. Other justifications for a booster has been incidence of COVID-19 infections in vaccinated individuals. However, there is no baseline data for protection against infections for most vaccines because, unfortunately, clinical trials were not designed to evaluate protection against infection. However, vaccines continue to be highly effective against severe disease. Next slide. Additionally, there is a risk of original antigenic sin phenomena after a booster dose. When antibodies to immunodominant epitopes are made, which get boosted after booster doses with immune memory, vaccination with a new strain or infection with a new strain hijacks the immune system towards immune response to same epitopes for which antibodies were originally made, leading to no protection against the new strain after disease or vaccination. Next slide. Finally, booster doses leading to high levels of circulating antibodies may generate escape mutants of SARS-CoV-2 virus. So to finally conclude, based on experience with the protection by existing vaccines, booster dose is not justified for general use at this time. It may be justified for immunocompromised or elderly who did not get adequate immune response after initial vaccination. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. The next speaker is Dr. Jessica Rose.
My name is Dr. Jessica Rose, and I'm a viral immunologist and computational biologist. I've taken it upon myself to become a VAERS analyst to organize the data into comprehensive figures to convey information to the public in both published work and video mediums. Safety and efficacy are the cornerstones of the development and administration of biological products meant for human use. Risk is a measure of the probability of an adverse event occurring and the severity of the resultant harm to health of individuals in a defined population. Safety is a judgment of the acceptability of this risk in a specified situation. Efficacy is the probability of benefit to individuals in a defined population from a medical technology. Refer to slide 1. This is a bar plot that shows the past 10 years of VAERS data plotted against the total number of adverse event reports for all vaccines for the years 2011 through 2020, and for COVID-associated products only for 2021. The left bar plot represents all adverse event reports, and the right bar plot represents all death adverse event reports. There's an over 1,000% increase in the total number of adverse events for 2021, and we are not done with 2021. This is highly anomalous on both fronts. These increased reporting rates are not due to increased rates in injections and not due to simulated reporting. This has been shown using a comparative analysis of influenza data. The onus is on the public health officials, the FDA, the CDC, and policymakers to answer to these anomalies and acknowledge the clear risk signals emerging from VAERS data and to confront the issue of COVID injectable product use risks that, in my opinion, outweigh any potential benefit associated with these products, especially for children. Slide 2. This is a time series plot that shows the total cumulative number of cardiovascular, immunological, and neurological adverse events for 2021 associated with COVID products. When the cumulative absolute counts are normalized to the total number of fully injected individuals in the U.S., we can see that 1 in 660 individuals are succumbing to and reporting immunological adverse events associated with the COVID products. The underreporting factor is not considered here. Slide 3. This is a phylogenetic tree showing the emergence of the alpha and delta variants of COVID-19 over time. The emergence of both of these variants and their subsequent clustering arose in very close temporal proximity to the rollout of the COVID products in Israel. Israeli data from the Ministry of Health and Our World in Data reveals that 98.1%
המענה הקולי של 0, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, 5, 0, 8, 3.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Sorry about that. Israel is one of the most injected countries, and it appears from this data that this represents a clear failure of these products to provide protective immunity against emergent variants and to prevent transmission, regardless of how many additional shots administered. And this begs the question as to whether these injection rollouts are driving the emergence of the new variants. There's clear and present danger of the emergence of variants of concern if we continue with these alleged booster shots. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. Next speaker is Professor Rajesh Levy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joseph Levy. I hope you can see my personal title slide labeled as slide A on the bottom right. I'm on the faculty of the MIT Sloan School of Management. I have no conflict of interest to disclose today, and my presentation represents only my individual opinions and does not reflect in any way on the positions of MIT. Next to slide B. Since the Pfizer's request for the approval of the boosters is partially based on the so-called study conducted in Israel, it is important to understand that the booster vaccination campaign in Israel was anything but a carefully designed study. In a matter of less than 6 weeks, Israel moved from its initial intention to vaccinate the over 60 population to vaccinating anyone above the age of 12, and it is now about to mandate booster vaccination for anyone to maintain green passport status. This does not allow any reliable learning, definitely not in such a short amount of time. And please understand that the adverse event surveillance system in Israel is truly dysfunctional, particularly around the booster deployment. I know from personal experience that the Ministry of Health in Israel does not address appropriately major concerning safety signals. Next to slide C. This leaves us with the question, what drove this massive booster deployment? Next to slide D. Trying to reach vaccine-induced herd immunity by reducing transmission rates will be consistent with the stated goal of the agreement that Israel signed with Pfizer, as you can see on slide D on the left-hand side. The problem is that by now we already know from mounting evidence that reaching herd immunity based on the current vaccines does not seem like a feasible or realistic goal. Not surprisingly, as you can see on the right-hand side of slide D, Israel continues to have among the highest infection rates per capita in the world. Next to slide E. You all listened to a presentation of the Israeli Ministry of Health that praises the efficacy of the boosters. I would like to caution this premature celebration and remind you that similar statements were made just 6 months ago around February on the 2 initial doses. Note on slide E on the right-hand side that COVID-19 deaths in Israel, in spite of all of the boosters, are on the rise, whereas in other countries, including many states in the US, they seem to be on downward trend at the moment. The data from Israel also highlights that the main risk of serious COVID-19 outcomes is focused to a large extent among the completely unvaccinated population and almost entirely in the over 61. On the left-hand side of slide E, you can also see data from Table 1 in a research paper by the Ministry of Health in Israel that suggests that the benefits from the boosters compared to the prior 2 doses in preventing serious illness might be much more limited than desired. There is much more to say about the problems of the current booster efficacy study. Next to slide F. But let me conclude by stressing how important it is to transition from emergency strategies to long-term ones. Slide F outlines 5 important considerations in doing so. They are self-explanatory. I hope you will hold off of approving this booster for broad use, at least until such a strategy is developed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Levy. The next speaker is Dr. Joseph Raymond.
Hello. Please, if you can go to my first slide. Hello, my name is Dr. Joseph Raymond, no conflicts to declare. I'm an emergency physician educated at Cornell Medical School. My residency was Charity Hospital in New Orleans, and I've been working in this region since. Where I work, over 65% of the population are not vaccinated. I'm here today to ask for help for those working the front line to help us reduce vaccine hesitancy. For this, we need larger trials that demonstrate the vaccine reduced hospitalization without finding evidence of serious harm. I know many think the vaccine hesitants are dumb or just misinformed. That's not at all what I've seen. In fact, typically, independent of education level, the vaccine hesitant I've met in the ER are more familiar with vaccine studies and more aware of their own COVID risk than the vaccinated. Next slide, please. For example, many of my nurses have refused the vaccine, despite having seen COVID-19 cause more death and devastation than most people have. I asked them why refuse the vaccine. They tell me while they've seen the firsthand dangers of COVID in the elderly, the obese, diabetics, they think their risk is low. They're not wrong. Next slide, please. One nurse showed me this Oxford risk calculator. A 30-year-old female has about a 1 in 7,000 chance of catching COVID and being hospitalized over 90 days. She asked me, can I assure her that the studies found her risk of serious harm from the vaccine is lower than her risk of hospitalization? The truth is I can't. Our trials weren't big enough. They weren't big enough to identify the vaccines cause myocarditis, yet now we know they do. Next slide, please. A recent observational study suggests the risk of vaccine-induced myocarditis in young males is higher than their risk of hospitalization from COVID. Is this true? We don't know. It's based on observational data. To know it's not true, we need a large trial that proves the vaccines reduce hospitalization more than they cause myocarditis in this age group. Next slide, please. The former FDA commissioner said the original premise of the vaccine was to reduce death and hospitalizations. And that was the data that came out of the initial clinical trials. Except, as you all know very well, and unfortunately, so did my nurse, the initial clinical trials did not find a reduction in death or hospitalization, likely because they were inadequately powered. Yet the former commissioner is correct that the initial trials should have been powered to find a reduction in hospitalization. Next slide, please. We need your help on the front lines to stop vaccine hesitancy. Demand the booster trials are large enough to find a reduction in hospitalization. Without this data, we, the medical establishment, cannot confidently call out anti-COVID vaccine activists who publicly claim the vaccines harm more than they save, especially in the young and healthy. The fact that we do not have the clinical evidence to say these activists are wrong should terrify us all. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Raymond. The next speaker is Mr. Steve Kush.
Hi, I'm Steve Kirsch. I'm Executive Director of the COVID-19 Early Treatment Fund. I have no conflicts. Advance to slide number 4 with the elephant. I'm going to focus my remarks today on the elephant in the room that nobody likes to talk about, that the vaccines kill more people than they save. Today, we focus almost exclusively on COVID death saves and vaccine efficacy because we were led to believe that the vaccines are perfectly safe. But this is simply not true. For example, there were 4 times as many heart attacks in the treatment group in the Pfizer 6-month trial report. That wasn't bad luck. Theirs shows heart attacks happen 71 times more often following these vaccines compared to any other vaccine. In all, 20 people died who got the drug, 14 died who got the placebo. Few people noticed that. If the net all-cause mortality from the vaccines is negative, vaccines, boosters, and mandates are all nonsensical. This is the case today. Death rates. Let's slide number 7, advance to the number 7 in the lower part. This shows that the all-cause death light rate in 3 cases. Only the VAERS numbers are statistically significant, but the other numbers are troubling. Even if the vaccines had 100% protection, it still means we killed 2 people to save 1 life. 4 experts did analyses using completely different non-U.S. data sources, and all of them came up with approximately the same number of excess vaccine-related deaths, about 411 deaths per million doses. That translates into 150,000 people have died. Next slide would be slide number 11, the nursing home. Now, the real numbers confirm that we kill more than we save, and I would love everyone to look at the Israel Ministry of Health data on the 90-plus-year-olds, where we went from a 94.4% vaccinated group to 82.9% vaccinated in the last 4 months. In the most optimistic scenario, it means that 50% of the vaccinated people died and 0% of unvaccinated people died. Unless you can explain that to the American public, you cannot approve the boosters. Slide number 16, please, myocarditis. The paper just posted yesterday on medRxiv entitled mRNA COVID-19 Vaccination and Development of CMR Confirmed Myopericarditis shows that the myopericarditis risk was 1 in 1,000. And that's an overall age range from 18 to 65, mean age of 33. It is not inconsistent with what the VAERS shows. Next slide would be slide number 18, gaming of the trial. It's pretty clear that the Pfizer trial results were gamed. It's statistically impossible for protocol violations to be 5 times higher in the treatment group. Why hasn't this been investigated? Slide number 19. Maddie DeGray was 12 when she enrolled in the Pfizer phase 3 trial for kids. Now she's paralyzed for life. It wasn't reported in the Pfizer results. I told Janet Woodcock there was no investigation. Please tell us why this fraud was not investigated. And finally, slide number 20, please. Early treatments are a much better alternative to boosters. The proof is that in Israel, cases are at an all-time high. In India, Uttar Pradesh is now COVID-19 free as of today. Almost nobody there is vaccinated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Mr. David Wiseman.
Thank you, Dr. Monto. Please see our written comments. Next slide, B, for our disclosures, and next slide, slide C. With this Lancet paper by FDA vaccine officials, we find ourselves agreeing with them, but for different reasons. We have an unclear need with unclear motivation, significant safety concerns, poor evidence of sustained booster efficacy, and wrong priorities. So while FDA and Pfizer can't agree about waning efficacy, let's go to next slide, D. We saw recently CDC's apparent withholding of key data from ACIP prior to recommending the Pfizer vaccine, and revealing that the primary driver for approving Comirnaty was to overcome hesitancy through regulatory misdirection. We agree with others that this has become politicized. Next slide, E. Pfizer's booster evidence today is weak. They are small studies in mostly younger subjects. They are short-term. There is no randomized control. There are no clinical outcome data, only serology. Inadequate safety given this is a gene therapy product. Where are the data from the 10,000 patient study? Next slide, F. If FDA cannot assure us of the safety of 2 doses, how can they assure us of 3? We see strong signals for death, myocardial infarction, and coagulopathy that need transparent investigation. Next slide, G. We find 3 potential pools of vaccine-associated deaths. Note the second pool among vaccinees. Next slide, H. Daily cases in Israel increase upon booster rollout compared with the same period last year. Please note the correct rollout is July the 1st at the 130 number. The Israel booster presented today has matching censoring bias seen in related studies, non-comparable populations, possible clustering bias, inadequate accounting for early vaccine effects, and a short follow-up in mainly older people. Next slide, I. Others show unexplained Israeli deaths lockstepping with booster rollout. This looks like the second pool deaths we said before in vaccinees rejected by New England Journal of Medicine in February. Next slide, J. Other safety concerns not voiced in the label are revealed in studies funded offline by NIH for menstrual disorders. Next slide, K. And offline by CDC in a disturbing revelation of an urgent need to monitor safety in pregnancy. Put this in the label. Next slide, L. Long-term safety. No cancer studies were performed. Moderna said its vaccine was a gene therapy product. Why is the FDA not requiring 5 to 15-year cancer and other studies per their gene therapy guidance? Next slide, M. We propose the term PCOVs to describe the wide spectrum of events being reported. Next slide, N. We are running out of options. Vaccine hesitancy won't be solved by bullying or coercion. Address safety, show convincing booster efficacy, revisit repurposed drugs. Next slide, O. We reverse the findings of flawed landmark studies that have misguided policy. Journals refuse to correct these defects, and Dr. Rubin's seat on this committee is a conflict. Next slide, P. This is what has to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Dr. Peter Douchey.
Hi, I'm Peter Douchey, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. Hopefully you can see my title slide with my financial disclosures. For identification purposes, I'm on the faculty of the University of Maryland and an editor at the BMJ. I have no relevant conflicts of interest. Next slide, please, which is labeled slide A. I want to start off by asking a question. Just what problem is this third dose aiming to solve? If we have a pandemic of the unvaccinated, as our public health officials have repeatedly stated, why would a, quote, fully vaccinated person need a third dose? Next slide, B, please. The briefing document suggests the rationale for boosters is waning immunity, but the lowest vaccine efficacy figure mentioned is 83.7%. And last month, FDA approved Pfizer's vaccine stating that efficacy against symptomatic COVID is 91%. Sure, a third dose might nudge up efficacy numbers, but so too might a fourth dose and a fifth dose. The thing is, the two-dose regimen efficacy numbers are already way higher than the 50% bar that FDA set in June last year for an approvable vaccine. Before contemplating the licensure of dose 3, shouldn't FDA first require evidence that the two-dose regimen no longer meets the efficacy bar the agency just weeks ago said it met? If vaccine efficacy is now below 50%, let's see the data. Next slide, C, please. Let's discuss safety. When discussions about a third dose began in July, CDC Deputy Director Dr. Jay Butler said it was vital to find out if the third dose increased adverse reactions, particularly severe ones. Unfortunately, we're still in the dark. Pfizer's booster application reports on just 329 people with no control data. Now there is a Pfizer ongoing placebo-controlled randomized trial of boosters in 10,000 people not discussed in the briefing document. But this trial is unlikely to satisfactorily characterize booster safety. First, the trial is too small and the enrollment's limited to healthy participants. Second, we really need to know how safe boosters are in people who already had bad reactions to dose 1 or 2. But such people are obviously less likely to volunteer to participate in this trial. So we won't have the data to answer the question. Yet if the booster is approved, such people will surely be mandated to receive a third dose. Final slide, D, please. I'll end with a question. Last week, 3 medical licensing boards said that they could revoke doctors' medical licenses for providing COVID vaccine misinformation. I'm worried about the chilling effect here. There are clearly many remaining unknowns, and science is all about probing unknowns. But in the present supercharged climate, and I'll point out that multiple members of this committee are certified by these boards, I want to ask FDA, what is FDA doing to ensure that those advising it are able to speak freely without fear of reprisal? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Douchey. The next speaker is Dr. Michael Krum.
Hello, I'm Dr. Michael Krum, Director of Public Citizens Health Research Group. I have no financial conflicts of interest. Public Citizens supported the emergency use authorization and subsequent approval of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine because clinical trial data demonstrated the vaccine was highly effective and generally safe. However, Pfizer and BioNTech have failed to provide sufficient evidence to assess the risk-benefit profile of a booster or third dose of their COVID-19 vaccine in individuals aged 16 or older in the general population. In particular, there is a lack of data on the effectiveness and its duration of booster vaccination in preventing important COVID-19 related outcomes, that is, serious illness resulting in hospitalization or death, in individuals aged 16 and older in the general population, and safety data for booster vaccination is very limited. Importantly, observational studies indicate that the primary series of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine still affords robust protection against severe COVID-19 disease and death in the U.S. We agree with the following assessment and conclusions offered by Drs. Gruber and Krause and other experts in their Viewpoint article published in The Lancet this week. Quote, current evidence does not appear to show a need for boosting in the general population in which efficacy against severe disease remains high. The limited supply of COVID-19 vaccines will save the most lives if made available to people who are at appreciable risk of serious disease and have not yet received any vaccine. Even if some gain can ultimately be obtained from boosting, it will not outweigh the benefits of providing initial protection to the unvaccinated. If vaccines are deployed where they would do the most good, they would hasten the end of the pandemic by inhibiting further evolution of variants, end quote. Finally, any move to widespread distribution of COVID-19 vaccine boosters in the U.S. would make it even more ethically imperative that the U.S. government move to ramp up global vaccine manufacturing so that everyone on the planet can be vaccinated. The world currently is suffering an artificial scarcity of high-quality COVID-19 vaccines because governments are permitting drug corporations to maintain monopolies. While the U.S. has been planning its booster vaccination campaign, the vast majority of people in low and middle-income countries have no access to any COVID-19 vaccine, let alone the highly effective mRNA vaccines. If the U.S. is to proceed with COVID-19 vaccine boosters, we take on a special, greater obligation to do everything in our power to get as many vaccine doses as possible, as quickly as possible, to people in low and middle-income countries, and especially to invest immediately in expanded manufacturing to create an adequate supply to vaccinate the entire world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Krum. The next speaker is Kim Woodzak.
Hi. My name is Kim Woodzak with Woody Matters, a drug safety organization started after the death of my husband. I'm also on the board of directors of USA Patient Network and have no conflicts of interest. It seems we are here today to discuss Pfizer's application to redefine the meaning of fully vaccinated from 2 to 3 doses. From the beginning of the pandemic, the goalposts keep changing. It makes you wonder if the current vaccination strategy is working. When looking at the submitted data, it's just over 300 people with only 12 of them over age 65, the highest risk group, sufficient enough to warrant approval for boosters. If the FDA approves this, we will take what we've learned on just 300 people and then give it, no, more like mandate it to hundreds of millions of people. This is beyond preposterous. While I am no vaccinologist, it would seem logical that dose 3 would have an increase in immune response over 2, 4 doses over 3, 5 over 4, and so on. At what point will enough be enough? At the end of the day, can we really vaccinate our way out? While boosters may be good for business, let's be real. These mRNA vaccines were never designed to stop transmission or eradicate the virus. These vaccines are not the same as those being used to eradicate polio or smallpox. I have to wonder why we chose to go down the vaccine path first versus focusing on treating those with a COVID diagnosis before it was too late or ended up in the hospital or worse yet, dead. And also, we haven't heard any discussion from our national leadership on the role natural immunity plays. Instead, NIH, CDC, FDA, and the White House have told Americans that vaccines are superior to our innate immune systems and beat out any natural acquired immunity. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. First, our government incentivized, more like bribed, the public to get these shots. Then we were told about the possible need for boosters while shaming and blaming the unvaccinated. Now the government is forcing them with mandates. Is there a reason we want everyone to be vaccinated? Is it so adverse events can't be distinguished between vaccine and the virus? Or is it to help masquerade the waning effectiveness of vaccines and blame the new variants when it may just be the mutating virus escaping leaky vaccines? Politics and fear seem to be in the driver's seat. Facts around data and science can no longer be questioned or openly debated without being discredited or labeled as misinformation. Just look at what the professional medical societies are collectively doing, threatening doctors with losing their medical license if they deviate from the official protocol or narrative established by CDC and public officials like Dr. Fauci. People are not able to talk about their negative experiences without being dismissed, harassed, or being called an anti-vaxxer. Just look at what happened to rapper Nicki Minaj this week. People came out and attacked her for telling her family story and voicing an opinion. We are walking a slippery slope when regular people, celebrities, doctors, and scientists are silenced, or worse yet, censored. Finally, I would be remiss if I failed to mention the hundreds of thousands of people who paid the high price by doing the right thing for the greater good. Their lives have been forever changed. I don't have enough time to begin to touch on the currently reported safety issues impacting tens of thousands, including children and young adults, and all the future safety issues not yet realized. Ladies and gentlemen, we are part of the largest pharmaceutical experiment ever conducted on humankind. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your deliberation.
Thank you, Ms. Woodzak. The next speaker, Paul Alexander, we could not connect him, so we'll try him later. So we'll move on to the next speaker, Ms. Linda D.
Hi, yes, my name is Linda D. I have no conflicts. I have been a community rep on many CEDAR antiviral advisory committee hearings. Emphasis on the unvaccinated and international vaccine donations from the U.S. Issues are misplaced. FDA does not have the power to increase international vaccine donations or create policy to promote increased vaccinations at home or abroad. We are here because there are differing opinions on whether there is sufficient data to support licensure of a third dose of BNT162b2 for people 16 and older. The sponsor is relying on data from a number of sources that show activity wanes between 6 and 8 months after the second dose. Data also suggests that breakthrough cases were caused by waning effectiveness, not the Delta variant. Sponsors also conducted a sub-study within their registrational study that eventually established safety in 306 participants 18 to 55. I think the Israeli safety data was helpful even if it was in mostly older people. The third 16.2b2 dose was found to be as well tolerated as the second dose and elicited responses to wild-type virus not inferior to the second dose response. The sponsor believes the FDA development guidance permits these data to be extrapolated to include individuals 16 and 17 as well as people over 55. Has the sponsor provided sufficient data from adequate clinical trials to justify their request for licensure? Reasonable people strongly disagree, as is evidenced by the different positions taken in recent New England Journal and Lancet articles. I've been an AIDS activist for some 35 years. I understand only too well the need for access, but I have learned the importance of evidence-based medicine the hard way. We all rely on the FDA to ensure that interventions are safe and effective. If you do not believe that data are sufficient to justify full approval, please consider the innovative practical solution of accelerated approval, which we've used in the HIV arena for many years, which also permits and is also permitted in some circumstances for vaccines according to the general principles for the development of vaccines to protect against global infectious diseases guidance, even though this guidance addresses international issues. Accelerated approval will permit access and requires the sponsor to conduct or complete at least one adequate, well-controlled confirmational trial before full approval is granted. This option should be considered as it provides the best solution for both the access and additional data dilemma questions presented here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. D. The next speaker is Dr. Megseymour.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the National Center for Health Research. I am Dr. Megseymour, a senior fellow at the center. We analyze scientific data to provide objective health information to patients, health professionals, and policymakers. We do not accept funding from drug or medical device companies, so I have no conflicts of interest. Today, you're asked to discuss whether the data presented support the safety and effectiveness of a booster dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, and if so, for whom. I will focus on the safety sample data discussed in the FDA's briefing document. The total safety sample is very small, only 329 patients. Even more important, the sample is not representative of the people who will want the booster. There are safety data on only 12 patients ages 65 and over, even though people over 65 are considered a priority group for a booster due to weaker immunity. 12 people over 65 is much too small to draw conclusions about safety and is obviously not large enough to have any confidence in the claim that adverse events from booster doses are less common in those 65 and over. In addition, there are 0 patients ages 16 and 17, and safety for this population is being extrapolated based on safety for those 18 and over. Data should be collected for any population that the boosters would be approved for, rather than extrapolating pediatric safety from adult safety data. Unfortunately, the size of the sample is not the only problem with the safety data. A median of 2.6 months is not enough time for assessing the safety of the booster. In addition, we agree with the FDA that it is unknown whether there will be an increased risk of myocarditis, pericarditis, or other adverse reactions after a booster dose. We all know that COVID can be deadly, but the efficacy of a booster compared to no booster is not well established, since the placebo control group is missing in addition to uncontrolled variables that could influence the diagnosis of COVID for those with boosters and those vaccinated without boosters. Assurance that the benefits outweigh the risks should be gathered before approving booster vaccines. Otherwise, potential risks may become obvious only after large numbers of the general population have received boosters, and the benefits of boosters may be much less than expected. FDA decisions should be based on proof of the safety and effectiveness of a medical product before the product is widely distributed. To approve a booster without adequate safety or efficacy data undermines the integrity of the FDA. It is unfortunate that the White House announced the need for and availability of boosters prior to FDA's assessment of the data. We know numerous people who have already received booster doses by merely asking their doctors or local pharmacies for a third dose. We all want to get the COVID-19 pandemic under control and protect as many people as possible, which is exactly why it is so important to carefully and scientifically assess the safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 booster vaccines. The data provided for this meeting do not allow us to draw confident conclusions, and a premature decision will make it impossible to do the research necessary to draw scientific conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Seymour. The next speaker is Ms. Kaplan Cameron.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Cameron. I'm a pharmacist, public health care professional, and Senior Director of the Center for Healthy Aging at the National Council on Aging, or NCOA. I have no conflicts to declare. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments today on behalf of NCOA, older adults, their family members and caregivers, and organizations that serve them. NCOA is a respected national leader and trusted partner to help people age 60 plus live with health and financial security. We believe every person deserves to age well. Vaccines are a vital part of aging well, and NCOA is committed to ensuring older adults have accurate and timely information about them to avoid confusion when making decisions. We also advocate for access to approved vaccines using public benefits for which older adults are entitled. Older adults have been disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Those 65 and over represent 13% of COVID-19 cases, yet account for nearly 80% of the deaths. COVID-19 also is having a disproportional impact on communities of color who have always had to face health disparities such as higher rates of chronic conditions, income inequality, and inadequate access to quality health care. The older adults in these communities have historically fared even worse. Further, we now know that older vaccinated people are most vulnerable to illness and hospitalization after a breakthrough infection. As the CDC recently reported, this may be due in part to waning immunity that is most significant in people aged 65 and up, who are at greatest risk for hospitalization and death from COVID-19. NCOA commends BURPAC's diligent and rigorous work as our country continues to face the evolving COVID-19 pandemic. Every day brings new knowledge about the virus, the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines, and the potential need for vaccine boosters, as discussed during this meeting today. The impact of COVID-19 pandemic on older adults has been tremendous, and we want to do all we can to protect older adults, as well as healthcare and long-term care workers, as we continue to learn more about the long-term effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. We are counting on the FDA to conduct gold standard reviews and to develop appropriate recommendations as you have done so well for many years. We ask that you carefully examine all available data on safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines over time among various population groups, especially older adults who are most vulnerable, and make your decision about booster shots as expeditiously as possible. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide comments, and we welcome further discussion and involvement as decisions are being made. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next speaker is Ms. Beth Battagliano.
Hi, thank you all for allowing me time today to present on behalf of Helping Women. I'm Beth Battagliano, President and CEO of Helping Women. We were founded in 1988, and Helping Women is the leading nonprofit women's health information source with a mission of educating women ages 35 to 64 years of age to make informed health choices. Throughout the years, we have informed consumers and healthcare providers about the advances in women's health, from the latest information on diseases and conditions to various milestones pertaining to access to care. We ensure that women have accurate, balanced, evidence-based information so that they can make informed decisions in partnerships with their healthcare providers. We also educate our audience regarding innovations in research and science, as well as changes in policy that affects women's access to treatment and care, so that women are prepared to self-advocate for better health outcomes. We know the importance of the process, and as we continue to educate our audience that the COVID-19 vaccine, like other drugs, are only approved following an established gold standard review process, COVID-19 vaccine development follows the FDA review process that includes research, multi-stage clinical trials, robust regulatory review, and approvals, and ongoing safety monitoring. We also know that data on booster shots for all three vaccines continues to be studied, and we anticipate more information from the FDA and the CDC very soon. And Helping Women will be ready to share out medically vetted, science-based research information on the booster shot with our audience of over 1.5 million women. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Battagliano. The next speaker is Brian Huddich. Sorry if I didn't say your name right.
Thank you for the opportunity for health advocates to provide direct feedback. I have no financial conflicts to disclose. I'm Brian Huddich, Executive Director of Health HIV, a national nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. We advocate for communities impacted and affected by HIV. Today I'm speaking to you as a health services advocate in an effort to get us all one step ahead of breakthrough infections among fully vaccinated people. While data clearly show that COVID-19 vaccines are highly effective against current strains, preliminary data also indicate that protection against infection overall appears to be waning, and that concerns us because it puts the populations we serve at even further risk for infection based on the point-in-time immunity of the general population. COVID-19 is a serious and potentially fatal and life-threatening virus, not just for those most at risk, like the immunocompromised and immunosuppressed, but for everyday Americans, especially front-facing service sector minority communities and marginalized populations in geographies with the highest viral load concentration, often a result of vaccine hesitancy or opposition. Not surprisingly, breakthrough infections appear to be more common among those with weakened immune systems. And according to data presented at a CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, immunocompromised patients represent 44% of hospitalized COVID-19 breakthrough cases, even though they only make up about 2.7% of the total population.
As part of this data look back, the FDA evaluated the science on the use of a third dose of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines in people with compromised immune systems, and they rightly determined that a third vaccine dose may protect them and others around them. In fact, they interpreted the findings to state that targeted policies like the booster shot being proposed today need to evolve as both science and risk evolve. It confirms that people with underlying conditions like advanced HIV, cancer, organ transplant, hemodialysis, and those on immunosuppressive therapies are seen as a significant risk for poorer outcomes from COVID-19. In essence, it highlights the need for our populations to stay as healthy as possible, but it also depends on the health of those around us. Fortunately, the vast majority of breakthrough infections are typically mild, but we are discussing the rationale for a booster shot in efforts to prevent the clock from winding backwards. We encourage the advisory committee to recommend booster shots for people age 16 and above, just as you did to protect people living with HIV. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next speaker is Dr. Paul Alexander.
Hi, thank you very much. I got cut off earlier, but thanks for patching me back on. That's good work by you guys. Look, I wanted to get into this by saying my background is in evidence-based medicine, clinical epidemiologist, and I'm very interested in the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. I'm following some very good presentations so far. Look, we want these vaccines to work as Americans and as global populations. So I think the message has to be that we're not coming at the FDA or we're not coming at the CDC trying to raise issues and just... Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, it's not that we want to raise issues and concerns, but here's the issue. We want it to work. But when we look at the surveillance, coming out of the VAERS right now, CDC, it captures 1% of 1 to 10% by our study of the published literature of the adverse events. And that is very suboptimal because it doesn't give a proper capture of the burden. So we really do not know what the adverse events and the deaths are. So we want proper safety monitoring boards. We want proper ethics committees following up on these vaccines. We are calling for critical event committees that we do not seem to know whether they exist. So we want the FDA to get on top of these vaccine developers and the CDC and put this in place for the safety of Americans. And it's a simple issue. You are giving us vaccines, and this is what we have been clamoring for. If you have an investigation of a vaccine with 1,000 samples, you put 500 in each arm, and you follow that for 1 year, versus you have another study of 100,000 people, and you follow that for 2 months. And the safety events that we are looking for, the safety signals happens at about 5 to 6 months. How could that larger sample detect them? And that's the issue. We are calling for longer-term studies, larger sample size, but longer-term. We need the medium and long-term studies to best assess the safety and efficacy, particularly safety, particularly when you're talking about putting these vaccines in our children's arms. We currently do not have the safety data. We absolutely do not. And for anyone at the CDC, anyone at the NIH, and anyone at the FDA to claim so, that is being disingenuous to the public. Now, I wanted to end by saying this. I looked at a study this morning by Chen on testicular infection post-CoV, SARS-CoV-2 virus. That means that there is an issue, and we are extrapolating based on the Japanese data that looked at the lipid nanoparticles and the mRNA that were accumulating in the tissue in the rat model. Yes, it's a rat model, but we have to extrapolate to humans. That showed that the lipid nanoparticle, the constituency of the vaccine, is accumulating in the ovaries, in the testes, in the spleen, in the adrenals, etc. So when somebody like Nicki Minaj, I have to invoke this, makes that statement, that's not a joke. People want to make this a joke and parody it, etc. But this is a very, very serious consideration because we even have animal data that shows us that there's a drop in fertility in the animal model. So we need this properly investigated. The public needs this answer properly. And I want to end by saying this. Under no condition, none, zero, based on the evidence today, must children be indicated for these vaccines. There is no risk to children, no statistical zero in terms of spreading and in terms of getting serious illness or dying from this. Dr. Martin Makary at Johns Hopkins, they looked at all of the data. Hello?
Yeah, we're out of time, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You can wrap it up.
Yes, we looked at the children in America that have died, and we found that save one, these children had at least one severe illness. So the reality is COVID is not a life-ending, life-threatening situation for children. Right now, the CDC and the NIH have not prosecuted the case as to why these children should be vaccinated, period. I say do not do this, and I beg your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we will conclude the open public hearing, and then I will hand over the meeting to Dr. Manto, the chair. Dr. Manto, take it away. I think we are getting to a break now. Could you announce the return time, please?